I worked as a ranger in a national park in Oregon. The forest here is dense, mystical, and sometimes eerie. Most of my shifts were peaceful, but one shift haunts me to this day. That evening, I received a call about a missing hiker. The guy had fallen behind the group and no one could find him. I went in search with my partner, Jason. The sun was setting, the shadows were lengthening, and there was a certain anxiety in the air. An hour later, we came across a strange path that was not on any map. The trees were growing so densely that the flashlight beam could barely penetrate. And suddenly we saw a small hut in the middle of the forest, which none of us knew about. "What the fuck is this?" Jason whispered. The door was ajar. There was a faint light inside. We walked in. The room had old furniture and smelled like mold. But that wasn't the worst part. On the table were photos of the missing tourist. In some of them, he was still alive, but he looked scared, and in others, I don't even want to describe what was on the others. "We need to get out of here," Jason said, but suddenly we heard footsteps behind us. I turned around and saw a man. He was tall, in old clothes, with empty eyes. He looked at us silently, holding a large knife in his hand. He took a step forward and whispered, "You were not supposed to see this." My heart was pounding like crazy. We rushed to the exit, and I don't even remember running back to the car. The next day, we reported the hut to our superiors, but they told us, "You are mistaken. There is no such hut." Then they made us sign a non-disclosure document. They said it was to avoid panic among tourists. The boy was never found, and I still hear the rustle of footsteps in the forest every time I go there, and I'm scared to think how many more such houses are hidden among the trees.
I worked as a flight attendant on domestic flights in the United States. Airplanes are a world of their own. You see, hear, and know more than you would like to. Once we were flying from New York to Los Angeles. There was a man in an expensive suit on board, accompanied by two agents in black glasses. Everything was fine until I overheard him talking to one of the agents. "If they find out I'm here, everyone will go to hell." I became alert. A few minutes later, one of the agents came up to me and said, "You didn't hear anything. Do you understand?" The next day, I was summoned to the airline's office and forced to sign a non-disclosure document. They said it was for general security. 2 years later, I saw this man on the news. He was a financier of a large drug cartel who was then hiding from the FBI. I was on board with one of the most dangerous men in the world, and I couldn't say a word.
I was working at a construction site in Nevada. We were preparing the ground for a new hotel. It was a normal job, no big deal, until we came across an underground bunker. It was old, abandoned, but inside were archives of documents, old computers, and what looked like a laboratory. My partner opened one of the safes and turned pale. "Dude, this is human experimentation." We decided to report to the bosses. An hour later, some experts arrived at the scene. We were gathered and forced to sign papers that said, "Everything you saw is confidential information. If you disclose it, you will be imprisoned." A week later, the construction was stopped and the site was simply covered with earth. I still think, what the hell did we find then? I worked for a large technology company in San Francisco. Our department was developing the latest devices to improve security. Sounds noble, right? But in reality, it was a big pile of crap. One day, my boss asked me to test a new device, a black box that was supposed to collect data for analytics. I connected it to the server and started monitoring the data. After a few minutes, I noticed that the device was sending data directly to a government agency. GPS coordinates, private conversations, passwords, everything was being sent there in real time. I thought, is this hacking my country? I tried to tell my colleagues about it. An hour later, the company director called me in. He threw an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, on the table. "Sign it or say goodbye to your career." And your freedom, too. I signed it. That night, I got drunk as a skunk. Many years have passed and the company went bankrupt. So I'm here with this story. Now I can finally say they sold our data to the government and I had to hide it. I used to work as a geologist for a small mineral exploration company. Our last job was in the mountains of Colorado. It was cold and windy, but the nature was incredible. At least it seemed so. One day, my partner Dave and I were studying old maps of the region. We noticed the markings of an old mine that no one had talked about. The mine was not marked on the new maps, but curiosity got the better of us. We decided to check it out. As we approached the site, we saw an abandoned entrance covered with rocks. Dave took out a flashlight and said, "Let's see what's inside. Maybe we'll find something valuable." We crawled through the narrow opening and went inside. It was cold and damp, and the air smelled of rust and rot. Flashlights illuminated the old rails and rusty trolleys, but after a few steps, we saw something that shouldn't have been there. The walls of the mine were covered with symbols and signs that looked like ancient runes. They glowed with a faint green light. It was incredible, but also eerie. Dave took a few photos and whispered, "What the hell is this?" We moved on and suddenly heard a sound like metal scraping. Then we heard footsteps, clear, heavy footsteps behind us. We turned around and saw a figure in old miner's clothes with no face visible. He stood there and just looked at us. "Let's get the fuck out of here," Dave whispered. We ran for the exit without looking back. Once outside, we breathed heavily and looked at each other. The next day, we reported the discovery to our superiors. A few hours later, people in black suits arrived at the site. They closed access to the mine and forced us to sign non-disclosure documents. They said it was national security and that the mine never existed. Now, every time I hear about people going missing in the Colorado mountains, I think about those symbols and the figure in the dark. Sometimes it seems that the mine is still waiting for those who dare to go too deep.